would it take for you to leave behind your life as you know it? That's a question that I ask you to consider today. And it's a question I really hadn't considered myself until that day. And there's nothing particularly peculiar about that day until he showed up. I got up at dawn as I normally do. I made a quick breakfast and headed out to my boat. See, I'm a fisherman. And so was my father, and so was his father before him. It's a family business, and I know all the tricks and the tools of the trade. They've been passed down for generations. Simply put, I know what I'm doing. Because of the demand for fish, I had partners working with me on my boat. I don't really need them for their expertise, but the work I have to do is too much for one person. Now, don't get me wrong, James and John, they're wonderful, capable men, but I'm in charge of the ship. There's something about working on the water that makes you think about your life. I love fishing. My father always said I was born to do it, but I wasn't always convinced. I always thought there was more for me out there beyond the Lake of Gennesaret, and I would soon discover what that would be. But I digress. Like I said, there was nothing unique about that day. Nothing stuck out, just a normal day. You know, the storms can come quick and strong on the lake, but it was calm that day. We had gone out a couple times already. We hadn't caught anything. And that's never a good thing when your life depends on how full your nets are. But after several tries, we decided to come in. We cleaned off all the algae from our nets, and we planned to get back at it in a few. We couldn't end the day with empty nets. As I was grabbing a quick snack before our next attempt, I heard a loud commotion outside. When I peeked out the window to see what was going on, I saw this man, this stranger, getting into my boat. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm not really a big fan of trespassers, especially ones that bring large crowds of people along with them. I ran outside, and just when I was about to chew this guy out, I recognized his face. It was Jesus. This was the same man who had just healed my mother-in-law. She was so sick. And he showed up and healed her. And that was such an incredible moment for me and my family. Jesus made her well, and at her healing, she got up and she served us lunch. That's just kind of the woman my mother-in-law is. I haven't seen him since that moment, but I know he had gained quite a following because of his miracles. Well, here was this same Jesus standing in my boat staring at me. At the sound of his voice and the sight of his face, a wave of calm washed over me. My fists were no longer clenched, and neither was my jaw. And he asked me calmly, "Can we set out now?" I wasn't really in the mood for guests that day. I don't really like when people get in my way, but because of what he had done for me, I felt like I owed him something. So we set off from the shore, leaving the loud crowd of people behind. Now, I'm not one for small talk, so I wasn't sure really what to say to this man. I had spent the day grumbling to James and John about our lack of success, but I didn't feel like that talk was appropriate in front of Jesus. I was a sailor, and I had the mouth of one. And for some reasons, that didn't seem like the kind of talk this healer from Nazareth would appreciate. We weren't that far from shore, so Jesus continued to speak to this crowd of people. The things he taught were strangely comforting. He talked about God. He talked about a kingdom not of this world. He spoke of justice and righteousness, and he spoke all of this with an authority unlike any I've encountered before. After a while, he finished up and he sat back down in the boat with us. The crowds began to make some noise, but our boat was still quiet. Now, I'm not comfortable with silence, but before I could awkwardly get out a word to Jesus, he turned to me and said, "Simon, put out in the deep and let down your nets for a catch." Now, to be honest, I was a bit offended. I wasn't asking for any help. And this guy may know a lot of things. He speaks with wisdom and he heals with power, but I'm the expert on this boat. I've made a career of this, so with all due respect, Rabbi, stay in your lane. I think James and John sensed my frustration and gave me a look as if to tell me to think before I opened my mouth. They give me that look a lot. I paused for a moment and I thought of my mother-in-law and I responded in a different way. Master, we toiled all night and took nothing, but at your word I'll let down my net. Now, part of me wanted to just prove what he didn't know. Part of me was desperate for anything to give me a taste of success for the day, and yet another part of me thought maybe he does know more than me. But whatever it was that led me to listen and act, I'm thankful for it because what happened next was miraculous. We cast the net out like we had done a half dozen times earlier in the day. I wasn't hopeful, but I was desperate. And almost immediately the water began to stir up. The line was strained and the boat began to rock. And what were barren waters and empty nets suddenly were full of fish. It was a flurry of activity as fish splashed and pulled at the net. As we started to haul them in, the nets began to show signs of breaking, so we quickly called to the other boat that was with us, and they came over to help. I had never seen so much fish before in one load. Never had I seen such a catch. Now, this more than made up for our failed attempts earlier in the day. We had more than enough. And so much so that our boat began to sink from the added weight. Surprisingly, that didn't really matter much to me. So you'd think that my eyes would be fixated on the fish or the prospect of losing my boat, but that was not the object of my focus. Mouth hanging open, I caught myself staring at him, at Jesus, at this healer and teacher and apparently master fisherman. Suddenly I felt guilt. Fear. Suddenly knew I wasn't worthy to be in his presence. I wasn't worthy of such a catch. I knew I wasn't worthy of such a gift. He gave healing and fish in abundance. He gave it all in abundance, even in my doubt, even in my arrogance, even as I laughed at the thought of him helping me. Suddenly terrified, I fell to my knees and squeaked out the words, "Depart from me, for I am a sinful man, O Lord." They kind of caught me by surprise. I said these words because I was afraid. It wasn't done out of a newfound humility or desperation, just fear. I don't know if you've ever been in a situation like that where you were blatantly proven to be wrong. Your doubts were shown to be misguided and it embarrassed you. You were shown up at what you thought you did best. Your arrogance was drowned out by someone more competent than you. It isn't fun. It's actually pretty humiliating. But this time I wasn't being called out by James or John or one of the other guys. I was being called out by Jesus, and it scared me. I know how I treat someone like that in that situation. I felt like a failure, guilty and ashamed. I wasn't worthy of such a gift, and he had every right to let me have it right there. But he didn't. He didn't scold, he didn't yell. He didn't hang anything over my head. Instead, he gently just replied to me, "Don't be afraid." He responded with grace. He responded with humble authority. He responded to my fear and pleas for mercy with a calm reminder that everything was going to be all right. There was nothing to fear. There's no wrath coming for me, no punishment or harsh rhetoric. Not even a sarcastic comment was waiting on the lips of Jesus. And in an instant, I went from being scared to comforted. I went from feeling like an outcast to being welcomed back in. I went from being an undeserving sinner to a forgiven saint. And in that moment, I knew who I was kneeling in front of. He wasn't just a master, he was my Lord. He was Lord, and it astonished not just me, but all who were present on those boats. As we realized this fact, we knew that those who recognize their place before him do not need to cower in fear. And seeing Jesus in this way, we knew our lives would never be the same. And then Jesus gave me not only an identity and comfort in my fears, he gave me a purpose. He said, from now on, you will be catching men. From now on, you'll be fishers of men. You'll cast your gospel nets wide in my name, and you'll reel in people close to me. Sometimes your nets will come up empty. Sometimes it will be bursting at the seams, but I tell you that if you listen to my voice, your work will not be in vain. So don't be afraid. You have worth, you have a purpose. You have a calling. It may sound strange, but in that moment, I felt like Isaiah in the temple, if you remember that story. Woe is me, I am a sinner. And in response, God came to me, he touched my lips, and he sent me on his mission, and I was forgiven. I was made clean, my guilt removed from me, now empowered to live with purpose. And to me, that seemed a greater gift than all the tilapia flopping around us in the boat. It was more calming than a sunset after a long day of work. It was more empowering than if I had pulled up twice as many fish by my own strength. With just a few words, Jesus shook up my mood. He completely messed with my thinking, and from that day on, my mission and life would look different. Everything in me told me to believe Jesus. Everything in me said that this was the moment I had been longing for all my life. And without hesitation, I took those words of his and I made them my life's goal. And sure, I know I had plenty more to learn, and we would soon see the cost of this mission, but following Jesus became the only option for me. Nothing else seemed as important. Nothing else seemed to fulfill like that calling that Jesus extended to me. And James and John must have felt the same way. Because looking at each other, we all knew what we had to do. We dropped our nets. We left behind our business, our income, our lives as we knew them. We followed Jesus. People thought we were crazy. It was a leap of faith I've never regretted. And although the cost was great, I was never the same. So now I ask you the same question again. What would it take for you to leave everything? What would it take for you to leave behind the things that you cling to so dearly? Jesus is calling to you too, you know. What would it take for you to place your other earned identities to the side and pick up the net and be a fisher of men? The Lord, Jesus, is calling you to something greater. What would it take for you to see this calling as your primary purpose in life, sharing the mission of God, sharing the story of Jesus, his perfect life filled with healing and powerful teachings, his sacrificial death filled with horror and humiliation, his complete resurrection filling each of us with hope for new life. Every once in a while, a doubt begins my mind about the decision I made that day. Then I remember his face. I remember his words spoken to me. I remember the sense of peace and purpose that filled me fuller than those nets. In my worst moments, I remind myself of how he called me that day. His calling is not just to me or the other disciples. His calling is to you too. How will you respond? What would it take for you to leave everything and follow him? It's a life of sacrifice. Believe me, I know. Being a follower of Jesus has its cost, but I know your life will be changed forever. Drop everything you have and follow him. Let me pray for you. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for the call